So welcome, officially welcome. I'm Jessica, head of our corporate partnerships at Weforest. I'm here with Alexander Watson of OpenForests. A very warm welcome. We are super happy to be talking to you today on the topic of tackling greenwashing. Let me set out for you, first of all, what the webinar and the structure is going to look like for the next hour, so that you can see what's coming up. So first of all, we'll have a brief introduction to greenwashing, but particularly also talking about what that means in the contexts of nature-based solutions, forests, trees, nature. And that will be followed by two presentations. The first from Alexander on the technical side of tackling greenwashing with technology. And I will follow Alexander's presentation for a bit more of a look behind the scenes into a project and what it takes behind the scenes to get to the claims, the credible communication that he'll share with you. And finally, the last 20 minutes, we're going to make sure we've got time for Q&A. These are discussions that always have wonderful experiences, super experts behind on the webinar. So we'd absolutely value all of your comments, reflections, questions, and so on. Please put them in the chat. We have a colleague and several colleagues who will be curating your questions, and they'll be collected so that we can deal with them all together at the end. So that's the structure of the webinar. And perhaps we can kick off. We can explain a little bit why are Weforest and OpenForests coming together to talk about this topic. We've been working together as two different organizations for about 8 years, is it, Alex?
Yeah. I think I know you maybe 1 year longer, but I think the first official collaboration started 8 years ago. Yeah.
Great. And I
And
think we're in two different worlds. So as from your organization side, as technology providers, our side working with businesses who want to make commitments, and Weforest who operates the project. It's two complementary areas, if you like. I was going to say, Alex, I think we've seen a lot of change in our time as two organizations in the same space. I think we've seen a lot change since the last 8 years, even more so in the last 4 even. There's a lot more awareness around greenwashing. Weforest certainly gets a lot more questions around what do you do, how do you track, what do you monitor? And I think looking back on it, we saw tree planting. There was a time when it was very simple marketing messages. People got very excited about trees as the poster child for the climate solution. And it feels like times have changed. There's been a few wobbles, a few, let's say, trust issues around these topics. What's been your kind of experience around that and your own reflection?
yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, with our partnership, we fostered this transparency right from the beginning. So we started with implementing maps and monitoring right from the beginning. So many years ago, before basically these first scandals appeared. But yeah, we could see that more and more problems have evolved in this space. So we need much more funding for nature-based solutions. And we cannot get this funding into the space without transparency. So I think this is also the reason why we started to work together, and also why we are holding this webinar, because we want to show, let's say, our experience working with projects, working with technology, but also communicating this work on the ground towards corporates. Yeah. So, and to really, let's say, set the scene, I think it's important to get an understanding what greenwashing means. So maybe Jessica, you can.
Yeah, it's a pretty big one. So for us, greenwashing is it's a situation where an organization, a company is deliberately or sometimes accidentally, but they are creating false or misleading information about their greenness. One of the good examples, perhaps stark examples, is an airline. Everyone knows flying is not the greenest way of travel. An airline introducing reusable coffee cups massive promotion around this amazing marketing of their reusable cups, promoting themselves as the green choice, making people feel better about what they're doing, shifting attention entirely away from the true science-based method of this is not the green activity at all. So that's quite a stark example of what that means. But we've discussed this quite a lot in terms of what it means in our space, Alex. You've got a nice perspective on what that means. Why don't you tell us more?
Exactly. I think it's really important to give greenwashing a closer view, what it really means in practice, and let's say what kind of values have to be in place that you can say this is not greenwashing. So because this webinar is not about producing greenwashing, this webinar is really about avoiding greenwashing. And I think there are three very important value dimensions in place. One is legitimacy, meaningfulness, and transparency. So for the first one, so if you as a corporate put money to projects, it's important how much. So is it just 0.1%? Is it 1%? Is it 10%? So how much of your corporate you're really investing? Or are you just playing around with reusable coffee cups? So I would say a corporate should only highlight its environmental effort proportionally to the scale of its actual contribution. So that's the first point. The second value is the meaningfulness. It is very essential to choose the right project types to maximize the impact. So different projects have different impact. And then also to have the right KPIs in place to measure this impact. So I will start with the projects itself, just to give you an overview of what can be done. So you can support the protection of existing forests. You can go into a really degraded, destroyed landscape and help them to revitalize them. So you can have a very strong focus on carbon only, but you can also shift towards biodiversity to support biodiversity. And in addition to that all, there's of course always a social dimension because all projects are also about people. And after selecting a project, you have to choose also the right KPIs to document the impact. And I want to just give you two examples where the wrong KPIs, or let's say problematic KPIs, have been chosen. So it's quite popular to measuring only how much carbon dioxide a forest can store over time. But this could lead then, on the other hand, to, let's say, wrong incentives. For example, just planting fast-growing monoculture plantations with eucalyptus, which can store a lot of carbon, but are really harmful to the soil and biodiversity. So just focusing on carbon only is not the silver bullet. So, but coming to another one, for example, just counting the number of trees. This could also be misleading because you might then select projects like mangrove restoration, where you can plug in up to 40,000 seedlings into 1 hectare instead of let's say, a regular reforestation where you have like 1,000 trees. And this, of course, leads to nice and high tree counters, but actually to relatively small restored land. So we need to select a qualitative and quantitative documentation of these environmental projects that really enables us to measure the state of an intact, healthy ecosystem with all its ecosystem functions. Now, for the third value, I would like to hand over to Jessica to describe the issue of transparency.
Great. I think those are two brilliant ones, Alex. And transparency is one that we're faced with every day. So we work with businesses who, quite rightly, are asking more questions, better questions about the evidence behind the claims that they want to make. And we are super happy to be able to and need to be able to provide that evidence. And that, for me, is what transparency is. It's about being able to provide the evidence behind the claims you make. So, for example, if you're going to claim that you are restoring nature, you're going to claim that you're planting growing, protecting 1,000 football fields or 10,000 trees. Where is it? What species are they? Are they going to be supporting nature? There's a whole database and a wealth of information behind that really is necessary to be able to support good corporate claims. We're seeing a lot of that now. More, like I said, more questions, better questions. And I think that's where, from my side, Alex, the Explorer.land platform's really been able to transform how we can turn data from the field into data that's accessible publicly and can support companies. But I think also it's important for me, from my perspective, we've probably not even touched on everything that Explorer.land could do yet. I mean, I think it's still in growth phase. So I'm going to say, if I'm going to hand the floor to you to give your presentation on what we currently use in Explorer.land for, but also to say there's far more to go after this webinar. So, if this is touching everyone's interest points, we can feel free to contact us after the webinar as well to explore things in more detail. So the floor is yours, Alex.
Thank you very much. So I assume you can see my screen, correct? So tackling climate commitments with technology, how does that work in practice? So we established some years ago explorer.land as a site gig. Basically, we've been consulting with many restoration and conservation projects in the data space for many years. But then we found out that it's super important to show the project progress in space and time on a map together with data. And this is basically what Explorer.land does. Today, there are around 2,000 users and 1,300 projects that have been created on Explorer. And I will show you now how such a project presentation looks like and how it is used to document and track environmental claims. So I will show you quickly how these claims could be made public. I will discuss geolocated camera traps, satellite time series, and acoustic biodiversity monitoring. And finally, show how different data layers can be used to document the impact of a project. So we're starting now with the public commitment of contribution. So in order to avoid greenwashing, it's important to say how much a corporate is putting into a project, where, and what's the impact. I'm opening it now in a live version, so you see how this looks like. In this case, it's Nike. Nike has supported Weforest projects with a considerable amount of money to restore over 1,000 hectares of forest with approximately 1.7 million trees. So that's the commitment. But we want to track it down to the location. So we can see that this commitment is distributed across a portfolio of different projects with a different focus. And if I'm going into such a project, I can see that this commitment, for example, from this commitment, around 1 million hectares have been planted in this wildlife corridor project, a project that seeks to connect remaining forest patches and connect them so that the animals can migrate in this location. And you see from this commitment is then distributed over different locations so that you can go to each of these locations and see how large they are. In this case, 73 hectares and over 150,000 trees which have been planted. So I will now show, for example, if positive measures have been implemented, like a wildlife corridor, that this could help, for example, have an impact on the local population of species of animals, so that they can better migrate in this landscape. So what I will show you is a geolocated news post from a camera trap that shows here a wildlife corridor where an ocelot family is able to migrate again through this corridor. So, and if I look at some other posts, we also see a tapir here that uses this corridor to cross this quite intense landscape. I activate the 3D mode so that you can better see. So there's a bigger forest patch in the background, and it's connected through this wildlife corridor. So, but what happens here? So this is an area that should be reforested. And in order to see if this has been actually done, so this is I would say, a little bit outdated base map, we have the possibility to activate satellite timelines. There are different timelines available. I'm activating a monthly satellite timeline from NICFI with planet satellite imagery, and it shows clearly that this corridor has been reforested and now allows also the species to migrate. If I'm zooming back, let's say to 2016, and activating a satellite image there, you see there was no forest. So I showed the timeline already, and I will show now one specific feature because there are different ways to track environmental impact, and a very exciting one are acoustic biodiversity monitoring. It allows basically, by placing microphones in the landscape and recording the voices of different animals, to also detect the animals through algorithms. So in this case, they put into this wildlife corridor a microphone, and then they were tracking different sounds. And this is just one example of one sound, the toucan that's in this location that has been recorded and automatically detected through AI-based algorithms. Yeah, so these were a few examples of very specific monitoring. I want to close this presentation now with a more in-depth look into one project. Again, it's a project of Weforest. It's a project that's located in Zambia. It's a project with local communities, and you see all these little polygons. These are areas which are put aside for restoration. So, but we want to see what kind of dynamics are active in this landscape. So it's a huge landscape, and we might be interested in threats. So we can see, for example, are there fires in this location? So we can go there. We see, luckily, there is no fire in this location at present. So, but we can also check what the deforestation that's taking place in this location. And we see, wow, this over the past 20 years, there has been a lot of deforestation going on. And then the question is, okay, but what is the impact of Weforest working with the people, providing training on how to use beehives for additional income through honey, through restoration activities? What kind of impact could this have on this location, on this buffer zone around this central forest? And for this, I will activate the recent forest alerts. So they start in 2021. If I'm zooming out, we see there are some deforestation in this region happening, but inside of the project itself, the activities which have been carried out dropped significantly. And this is a nice way to show that, for example, local involvement and activities have stopped deforestation, almost the entire deforestation in this location. And Jessica will also show in her presentation, yeah, what else can be seen in this project location. So thank you very much. I will now hand over back to Jessica to give us a view behind the scenes of the project.
Thanks, Alex. It's always lovely to see that. I don't get to see all the functionality every day of Explorer.land, so it's really nice to see that once again. I'm going to share my screen. My presentation doesn't have all the fancy interactivity of Alexander's, but I would encourage you to go behind the scenes onto our website, where you'll find a lot more information about the projects and the details that I'm going to share with you. So just a brief word then about Weforest. We are a non-profit organisation, around 14 years old. We started out as a very small group, and now around 90 people, 70% of whom are based in our project locations. We are a very, very field-centred organisation, and our mission is to conserve and restore the ecological integrity of forests and landscapes with communities, which is a very long way, I guess, of saying restore healthy forest landscapes. And that's why for us, we've worked for a very long time with a lot of businesses and with tree planting, and we've seen the evolution of tree planting become forest and landscape restoration, because ultimately that's actually why people come to us, because businesses that want to take action for climate, they want to take action for nature, they realize that actually having a more long-term holistic view is really what's needed to drive this outcome. I think the one thing that I find when I'm trying to imagine healthy forests, and the analogy is like a finely tuned orchestra. So everything is in harmony. When we have degraded systems, all of the complex interactivity, nutrient cycling, pollination, everything that provides all the goods and services that nature does, they don't work. And I think that's ultimately our mission at Weforest is to restore that health. This is a brief overview of where we work and our impact to date. So we, like I said, we don't work just in trees. We are a forest and landscape-based organisation. So we're restoring over 50,000 hectares currently, all of which you can see on Explorer.land. That means that we're growing. And note that I say growing. That's also been an evolution in greenwashing terms. We're not planting. This is growing. It means protecting, regenerating, and planting 80 million trees. And that's typically where we work, is in areas where there are high pressures on forests from local communities, not because it's they want to, because there are high incidences of poverty, and the forests are essentially a supermarket, a pharmacy, they're a means of life. So 70,000 families altogether are engaged across our projects. And so on Explorer.land, you'll see mangrove projects on the west coast of Africa. You'll see in the north, Ethiopia, the eastern side of Africa, in the north there, in the drylands, Ethiopia. In the south, we're restoring native Miombo forests with smallholder farmers, and in forest reserves, the example that Alexander showed before. And in South America, the wildlife corridors that he also shared with you. We have some special projects in Tanzania, in Indonesia, and in general terms, I think if you want to explore more, please do go on the website and feel free to contact me afterwards. Weforest is quite an unusual NGO. We started out life and still do have incredibly important funding from business partners. You'll see this is a very high-level selection of them, just a few. Over the years, there's probably been over 450 business partners. So this is a selection, but names you'll know. Nike was one, Shopify, L'Occitane, Education First, if you're a cyclist and you know the Tour de France, you'll know Education First have their tour team. So there's a huge variety of industries, of business sizes, of geographical locations. And so with all of those businesses, we are thought partners first, creators and co-creators of the right projects, the right claims, the right communications to meet what's necessary. And that's one of the things that I'm very proud that the team is really able to help businesses through what is quite a tricky navigation. When the marketing team wants to go big on marketing, and the legal team's worried, and the CSR team's asking for info, to be able to bring all of that together and explain to each team what is needed and how it actually fits into credible communications is really quite important. And that's why we're establishing the business partners that we are, is because they're making big commitments, real commitments to climate and nature. Weforest is not always their silver bullet. I think that's the key thing. Businesses have to have multiple streams of action, and we are one of those streams helping them meet one of their commitments. A short word on our model. The way of restoring landscapes, as we've already discussed and not news to anybody here, is not to plant trees everywhere. We need to figure out what is the landscape, what are the drivers in the landscape, and how do we address them? Because ultimately, these are 10, 15, 20 plus years to get to our ultimate outcome. And so we work within 3 pillars of action. Stewardship, that's around local institutional support and capacity building. Forest management, bylaws, regulations, often the things that marketing teams don't care about when they want to make their claims. But unless we do them, the trees won't be there in the future. So this is a crucial pillar. The technical piece there in green on the restoration is never the same in any location. In some areas, it might be entirely planting where there is no mother tree left to regenerate anything. But in others, and in most of our projects, you will have a mix of conservation, assisted natural regeneration, farmer-managed assisted natural regeneration, and enrichment planting. So it's a complex operation, and it requires dedicated vision and milestones along the way. And tree planting can be a part of that. And finally, the economic resilience part. This is where the local communities need to become more resilient financially, from a climate perspective, to be able to reduce pressure on forests. And so unless we integrate all of those together, then our vision for restoring the healthy ecosystem doesn't work. And so we've got those 3 pillars. And that means going to a monitoring system and a kind of mode of operation, which is very relevant to how we need corporates to be able to communicate, or at least to put communications into perspective. So often corporates will ask, how many trees did we plant? And that goes to the far left, which is you can measure activities, or you can monitor activities that take place. You can plant trees, you can engage communities and count how many people are involved in their activities that lead to outputs, that also lead to outcomes. But over the longer term, this is the long-term goal. So being able to know what you're monitoring, why you're doing it, and help corporates understand that is a really important part of credible evidence, credible claims, credible data. And whilst Alexander's presentation was heavily tech focused, from our perspective, we are super interested in tech, but it's also people. We are, as I said, 70% of the teams are on the ground. So collecting data is crucial, and it's qualitative and it's quantitative. So we need to be able to use tools like Kobo Toolbox to be able to gather and systematize data on the GPS polygons, on the species types that you'll see growing in the nurseries. Everything's digitized so that it can be created in a database. But we also have a lot of data activities on the ground that can't be tracked by eyes in the sky. Species, so vegetation assessments on the ground, where you really have to be there. You have to be able to locate what are the species that are growing there. Because when a corporate asks you, are we restoring the health of the forest? There are so many indicators that go into health. You need to really start from the beginning, start from the ground. I've mentioned Kobo Toolbox. There are plenty of others, but this is just to say there are data sets behind data sets that ultimately go to informing what you see on Alexander's Explorer.land platform. And also, very importantly, the regularity of monitoring to be able to identify in our GPS polygons when we have these field location sites, permanent sampling plots to be able to track certain key indicators, not just species, but the diameters of the trees, the heights of the trees, and so on, all go into the big picture of and the long-term picture of tracking forest health, which you finally see on the Explorer.land platform that Alexander's just showed to you. And I think the additional piece of information behind the data set here is from all our work in the field to map our sites, there is a full inventory of the hectares, the locations, and the types of interventions, along with the densities of trees that go into our back-end system. So when an organization, a corporate like Nike, Shopify, whoever it is, comes to work with us, we match them and their area, let's call it 1,000 hectares, to specific polygons. And the integrity of being able to do that means we can guarantee there's no double claiming. I think that's one of the things that we realized over the years that's becoming more and more important to companies, to know that the area is not allocated twice. So that's super important. And it means, of course, as you've seen, that we can provide regular updates, which makes the marketing teams happy. But the background data makes the legal team happy. And so you've already seen the wonderful imagery that we can convey over time. And I think, of course, in dryland areas, things grow slower than in the wetter areas where things grow faster. And so that is also sometimes a corporate concern. How do you make sure you're not greenwashing by sending pictures, nice pictures with different time series? You've got to be very consistent and be very honest about how long it takes to really see change. I think that's a key part of our activity. And perhaps the second of the final slides here, Alexander showed you a picture of the deforestation rates in one of our project areas that the Explorer.land platform is able to monitor. By being able to use data sets like that, combine it with the field monitoring plots that we've established, and to create even more granular data layers to identify specific areas, we can combine that to be able to share really what's happened in the project. Yes, the deforestation rate has reduced significantly, but what else? This picture shows you in the blue, which is the forest reserve, which had been severely encroached before the project area. The blue area is forest gain. So not only is the deforestation rate stopping, but we're able to regenerate. And those are the kind of longer term outcomes when a corporate wants to plant 1,000 trees or they want to support forest restoration. It's these long-term indicators of success that we really need to be showing so that we can know that the funding is actually working and it's going towards the outcome that we were looking for. And one final word from my side, really. Again, I know this is a tech, we're talking about tackling greenwashing with tech, but this really is also, you don't do any of this without putting local communities at the heart of the work that you do. The trees won't stay there just because we have eyes in the sky and a monitoring thing. So this is fully recognition that without any of the strong, long and sustained trust built in communities, the corporates won't be able to have any of those confidence in claims. So from my side, Alex, that was really a bit of a look behind the scenes. I think perhaps we can go to some questions and answers. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
First of all, I want to say it was really, really, really interesting, Jessica. So I always see it from the maps and from outside and really get a little bit of a feeling and behind the scene view. That's really interesting. So. And I think I cannot only emphasize more, technology is super important also to having technology implemented at an early stage so that you can see if something is going wrong and you can correct it. So it's not just to say it's good or bad, it's also a management tool to improve the work on the ground. but finally it's really about the people who were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring this. Yeah.
No, you're totally right. I was thinking what I'm reflecting on when I think about our two presentations in terms of corporate claims and transparency and so on is there's so much data that we collect kind of behind the scenes, as it were, and doesn't all make it onto Explorer.land. What's your view on how much data should be there? Why are there some pieces that we don't include, for example?
Yeah. So I think the last one of the last slides you showed about this complex deforestation structures. So data can be often really really complex. So we have, for example, satellite times series that show how a project evolves over time. However, in many regions, you have seasonalities where trees, broadleaf trees, drop their leaves. So it looks like there are no trees anymore. So for non-expert, it could look scary if from one to the other day or one to the other month, all the trees are removed, but it's just they left their leaves. So or we have some preparations with fire to prepare the ground for plantings, so which is a traditional method in some locations. And if you see that on a fire alerting system, you might think, "Oh, my entire landscape is burning," but the farmers are just preparing, for the planting season. So therefore, these information have to be carefully curated. Certainly, they have to be fully disclosed internally to corporates to see and track the engagement, but they have to be, let's say, moderated in the public to not create some false expectations.
No, I think that's key, and I think that's one of the things you mentioned fire, Alexander. I think from my perspective, one of the super interesting things about working with businesses who want to support forests and nature is often they're in Europe or the United States in a big office block behind a computer, and really the idea that you would create a deliberate fire to burn off vegetation to reduce future fires is so, fighting fire with fire is so anomalous. It's almost a journey you have to go on to be able to explain what really is happening. It's the same thing with agroforestry. People want to plant, 50 million agroforestry trees, but actually agroforestry trees, some of them may be cut for timber, which protects trees in the forest. So there's all kinds of nuances that become, for some companies, quite difficult to manage early in their journey. For others, and in fact for the vast majority we work with, the learning about what it really takes to restore nature is a fascinating journey, and most organizations really keen to learn. Their staff are keen to learn, their clients are keen to learn. It's sort of a ripple effect, if you like. And if you can curate the content credibly at the right pace and at the right time, it's really quite a journey to take people on.
Yeah. No, it's a super interesting broad field, and it would, I'm sure we have a lot of experts also here in the audience. So for me, it would be now super interesting to get some questions from the audience. So
absolutely. I can see one already in here. I don't know if we want to take them one by one. Alex, should we take one by one? There's one here from Myra, who's asking, do you create norms and benchmarks? I'm not sure if that's a question for you on the technical side of technical norms, or if that's a question for Weforest. But maybe you could take it from we could try it from both angles. Unless Myra, you want to qualify in the chat. Why don't you take it from a technical perspective?
Yeah, so I think a base norm should be that every project out there, every nature-based project out there should have a geolocation and should have a remote sensing-based monitoring in place. But then it also needs to be validated and ground truth through, let's say, local data recording. So not sure if that's really a norm, but it's a prerequisite to make sure that a project runs in the right direction.
Yeah, and from our side, I mean, in terms of norms and benchmarks from a field perspective, in general, from a monitoring and evaluation perspective, there is certainly under each pillar I described, there are KPIs that across all projects that are relevant across the board, but each project then has its own specific requirement, if you like. So you can tailor the KPI to be able to track what you want to track in that project. So there's standardized and then a specialized, if you like.
And here's also another super interesting question for you, Jessica, from an anonymized anonymized visitor. How do you convince or convey companies that just the number of trees planted is not the only metric that is important, but climate, biodiversity, social impact is vital, and it's a long-term thing and not a short-term outcome?
That is a brilliant question. This has been my life for 3 years or so, and it's wonderful to be able to do that. And let me tell you, it's not always successful, and it takes a long time in some cases. So my first reaction is it really depends on who from the company. A company is a big thing. There's always different departments in a company. Is it the CSR team, the corporate social responsibility team that's coming to you? Is it the HR team because they know their staff care, or is it the legal or compliance team? So depending on who comes, there's often a driver that they're not aware of yet behind the scenes that we can start to uncover and we can start to explore. Often people don't realize that there are bigger business issues behind, like staff retention. What happens if your staff just think you're not doing enough and you've done lots of things, but it's not enough and they're not connected to the things that they and their families at home care about? And so you can start to explore, well, what if you've got huge turnover rates? What if you had an engagement program that actually was able to reach real stories from the field with real evidence? And so there are multiple directions to go in, my long answer to that one, multiple directions.
Yeah, I think there's also a question for myself. So from Fernando, from Climate Farmers, what potential do you see in platforms such as explorer.land for the area of regenerative agriculture, where soils play the main role? My answer to this is that Explorer.land is project agnostic. So we see it from mangrove to agroforestry to conservation projects. And it's also agnostic in terms of what kind of data you can integrate. So we have a couple of dozens standard open source data layers like deforestation, fire, land cover, and land use, and like this. But it's also possible to integrate very specific data, for example, on soil organic matter, so into Explorer.
And there's another question while we're on the tech subject here. Even though Explorer.land onboarding feels smooth, it must all be quite tech intensive for small scale projects that deserve visibility. What's your response to that?
Yes and no. So I would say in comparison to like the standard GIS tools from Esri or QGIS, Explorer is quite simple to handle. Of course, I would say the major challenge is to get good quality, good polygons from the field, good measurements. And basically then they just have to be imported into Explorer, and then you can roll out your project story with geolocated news posts and videos. And so all the rest is already integrated and should not be much easier than handle Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, I do think that, if we had a programs team person from Weforest and M&E, I think the quality of the training, the ability to really execute and follow the process, the norms, the protocol that's been set in the field is super critical to being able to have the good data that goes on to Explorer.land. So I can understand that there may be some kind of jump to being walking with paper to record things, to being
Exactly. Exactly. So I think what with this map-based communication, WeForest also is like spearheading a new kind of communication, because usually communication is going in a line with a newsletter, with a PDF or something like that. With a map-based communication, you have to communicate in different directions. So you communicate basically in space and time. You show where your project is, in which direction it develops spatially, but also in terms of time. So you can revisit the project at different points in time and then see how this changed. And this, of course, could be a challenge for an organization, because on the one hand, you have the communication people who are used to do the communication, and on the other hand, you have the technical people who are used to create the map. And how to bring this together um, is an organizational effort, but we think it's worth doing so, because you can create a map as a single source of truth that combines storytelling and data in one place in a structured way.
Yeah. There's a few questions that are technical, and then there's a couple for me. Alex, if I can ask you again, then does Explorer.land publish viewer analytics? Do you see meaningful interest in the depth of data made available, or is the motivation to share about showing the intent of transparency rather than engagement per se? That's
How I got the question right. So there's statistics about how much how much people visiting the different projects on Explorer, and basically it's up to the visitor himself to activate certain information data. So basically everyone can find their own journey in an Explorer Land presentation. So you can explore the news posts, geolocated news posts, but on the other hand, you can also analyze the location with satellite timelines or with these thematic data layers.
okay. And there's a question for me here, which is, I think, it says, is my question is inclined towards impact communication. Who owns the impact? Is it the businesses funding, platforms, or Weforest? So, for example, if an impact's made to plant a tree, how do they communicate the same impact without double counting? Which is a perfect question on a greenwashing topic about double counting. And as I said in my presentation earlier, this is about the inventory of locations, the fact that we geolocate the areas under restoration, allocate the funding coming from a business, which can be a business like Nike, Shopify, L'Occitane, to those areas. If it's a platform, those platforms also will have their own hectares. They're never cross-allocated in the system. It's not possible to do that. So that's how we are able to not double count the impact. Okay, and another question for me: how do corporate partnerships book meetings to review progress, etc.? That's a good question. So each partnership is different. In a usual sense, you'll probably, once you explore on the website, you'll see that we provide impact reporting twice a year, an annual update that covers a full year, and the mid-year update to provide an overview of progress. So there's a formal update in that sense, but we do have also, for our larger partnerships that extend for multiple years, we have individual progress review meetings, and we have milestones, and we can discuss whether we're on track or not on track. And so what we're finding is that the more and more engaged businesses are, the more and more appetite they have to actually do more. Once they realize that it's not about the trees, it's about the people and the nature, and it becomes an and rather than you didn't hit the 20,000 tree target because there was a drought. That's it. So let's finish the relationship. We've all got to move away from those discussions. That doesn't help anyone. Are you can you see any more questions for us, Alex?
Yeah, so here's another question. What are the key elements that you use to select locations for landscape restoration? So maybe I can expand this question also further to say, okay, why is Weforest deciding to work with certain projects in certain regions?
Oh, you're putting it back to me. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. So one of the things that we do is that, or don't do rather, is we don't plant, grow trees and work in 90 countries. We are trying to be good where we are, to deepen and strengthen the relationships. And that's really scaling forest and landscape restoration in that way is hard. You don't do it fast because you've got to do it right. And so there are multiple ways of identifying the landscapes. We can There's a blog on that. I will share that also after the webinar. But that's the principle of our operation. So we stay in those locations. And I think the other thing I would say, I have a background in sustainable sourcing, responsible sourcing for agricultural commodities. And so what you will notice in where Weforest's working, it's not in palm oil landscapes, it's not pulp and paper, it's not in the Cerrado, of Brazil. We're working in overlooked or typically overlooked by corporates. There are no major sourcing areas. And that is so important because you realize at that point, these are the overlooked in many cases, overlooked areas.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe let me raise one interesting point. It's really about the risks of projects. So these projects are located in what we would say from a financial point of view, risky countries with low law enforcement, very remote, inaccessible. So basically not a place where you would put your money into. So let's say, as an investment.
Mm.
Yeah, for profit. So you put the money into these locations because you want to have an impact. But again, there's still the question, if a corporate, let's say, put a lot of money into one project, is this too risky? So a question that I often hear is how you manage these risks. So first of all, yeah, are you distributing it across different projects as a portfolio? So how do you make sure that yeah, a contribution by a corporate really has an impact?
Mm. This always comes down to what the intention is. If our our most impactful partnerships will always be large scale and long term, multi-year. And that
Yeah,
doesn't mean sprinkling money everywhere necessarily. That might be what the corporate needs to do from their own risk management
yeah,
perspective. But
yeah,
from our perspective, and we do work in areas with civil unrest, and it's very challenging. But often those are the places where you should stay. There is the most impact to be had. It's the link between, people and climate right there. So for the most part, we've established very strong relationships with those companies who know the risk they're taking, and they will stay when there are challenges to be had. We work through them together.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to really manage also the expectations, because if you go into such difficult difficult projects, um, there are problems, there are obstacles, and they have to communicated transparently right from the beginning. And there will be no project where you tick 100% in all categories. So it's a venture, yeah, to basically build a future worth living in.
That's a good way of putting it. I can see one more question or a couple more questions. We forests rely on corporate donation, green initiatives, or conservation finance tools. A question from Jack Sieber. Thank you, Jack. Principally, 90% of our funding is from corporates. That's why I say we're quite an unusual NGO. Clearly, the unlocking funding at scale will require new financing mechanisms. If you've got some discussions to have around that, feel free to contact me. I'd be super interested to talk. I think the key thing with the mechanisms now is that those unlocking that financing requires this long-term landscape focus, good data, good monitoring. And so I think we're in that space now. So I see more and more that if you're going to work at scale, that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, I think we slowly reaching the
Ah,
hour,
yes. Yes.
so I think we have to wrap up. So, um, is there any super urgent question, or could we answer them maybe in a follow-up email or in the chat?
There's quite a few, so why don't we answer follow-ups on the in our follow-up? I think after the call, after the webinar, we will follow up with perhaps a recording of the webinar, but certainly resources. One of the questions is around where can we find more info? And a lot of questions around can we work with Weforest. So I think there's quite a lot that we owe to people to get back on, and we can do that as a follow-up.
Yeah. So then maybe let's slowly end this webinar.
Okay.
Um, for me, it was a pleasure to organize this. Also with you, Jessica, it was really fun. I would say, as a final comment, by supporting one nature-based project, you can have many benefits for the climate, biodiversity, and local communities. Um, but my final statement is you have to do it right with high quality, high integrity projects, and it's needed to have an accurate monitoring and reporting right from the beginning.
Perfect. There's really nothing more to add, Alexander. Thanks very much indeed for hosting, accommodating us, and sharing our info. Thanks everyone for attending. It's really a pleasure to have everyone here. Please do contact us. You'll hear from us as follow-up, as I said, but wishing everyone all the best wherever you are.
Yeah. Maybe one little shout out to the team behind this webinar. I want to say thank you to Jill, who's organizing the technique, and also thank you to George and Leticia for moderating the chat. So, and specifically, thank you for joining this webinar. And I would say, let's start together to work on a future worth living.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care.